common problem in previous digital currency systems was that there was no real protection against fraud other than having a central authority that was the router, similar to a bank, for all transactions. So, before Bob sends money to Alice, right, Bob sends a signal to the central repository. The central repository makes sure Bob has that money to spend and he hasn't tried to send it to someone else. And then assuming all those checks are done, the money is sent to Alice and Alice can know that the central authority signed off on it, right? That was the previous system. With blockchain, because it uses cryptographic consensus protocols, you can force that there's always going to be a consensus. There may very temporarily be splits, disagreements, but ultimately the network will always arrive at one answer as to how a particular set of Bitcoin, for example, was spent, and everyone in the network will honor that, not because there's a central authority, but because they're all very, very highly economically incentivized to do so. So you get one canonical history of events, and as long as they're sufficiently old, they don't have to be very old, they could be maybe an hour old, you can feel very, very comfortable that history is never going to change. And the third is irreversibility and censorship and tamper resistance. So this comes up basically by the fact that the way that the chain, the history is built is by using very, very hard math that takes a lot of time and computational power to do. So that if someone was trying to produce a fraudulent version of the blockchain and it goes like even an hour back, more so even 2 hours back, they would have had to have done the computations to kind of reproduce the whole chain, and that would have been very expensive for them to do. It would have taken a long time for them to do because it's math and it's hard and you need complex computers to do it, and even with the complex computers, it takes a lot of time, a lot of electricity, etc. So you sort of throw all these things together, and what do you get? You get that blockchain enables, quote unquote trustless. Really, you have to trust the math still, right? You have to trust some other things like the availability of a network. But trustless, you don't have to trust the other people. Peer-to-peer transactions between pseudonymous parties. It's the first technology in history that really does this. And so just a simple example, Alice wants to buy Bob's DeLorean. I'm a fan of DeLoreans. And, she sends Bob 90 grand of Bitcoin. And Bob signs over title to the DeLorean. And both of them know that if say Alice didn't really have the Bitcoin, she was just pretending to have it, that no one controls this network. It's a peer-to-peer network. There's no one literally no one is able to reverse the transaction if it's a bad transaction. Nevertheless, because of these features, as long as they understand them, they understand the algorithms, etc., as long as they've downloaded the history and they've seen that in that history, Alice got that 90K of Bitcoins, they will both feel very comfortable that this is a done deal and they both got what they bargained for. It's a very powerful thing with no central authority involved. So that version of blockchain, where it's just kind of an exchange of value, that's been in existence since 2009, 2010-ish with Bitcoin. The latest generation of blockchain technologies that you see coming out, the most famous example of which is Ethereum, are implement additional functionalities on-chain. And in particular, they implement what we call decentralized apps, or dApps. And one example of that is what we call a smart contract. Now you may be starting to see how the law comes into this and how transactions come into this. So a smart contract is basically, it's a program, but it represents the terms of a contractual arrangement, right? So, think very simple if-then statements. If some person sends some amount of money to the contract, then the contract, triggers some other event. It could be tied into an Internet of Things device that releases some energy to a house, or any number of applications. But it's if-then statements, and it's the type of thing that a lot of times people would enter into a contract to represent. Now it could be a program. Once you sort of marry the latest blockchain technologies to that concept, then you get the idea of these smart contracts living on a blockchain, on a decentralized, peer-to-peer, cryptographically secured network. So they are almost like autonomous agents on this network because no one owns that network, right? It's not sitting on someone's server. It can't be stopped by any particular person. As long as there are some network participants, that will keep on going indefinitely. So this sort of introduces the idea of a self-enforcing contract, right? There's a contract that can't be breached. This is very new in history because, and it's a very new, it poses some challenges to traditional thinking in law, right? Because there's a whole theory in law, every law student learns about it in their contracts class, this theory of efficient breach of contract. That contracts should be designed in a way that, yes, they're enforceable, but you can still breach them and you can just pay some money damages, and that should be okay because if there's something better for you by virtue of breaching it, you should be able to do that, right? But a lot of people would say, no, and especially if you get into like countries where it's hard to enforce the law, right? Think India with its massive court system, cases take forever. This actually, is a damper on people entering into contracts and say, I don't trust this person, number one. And number two, I don't trust the law, the legal system enough to help me enforce my relationship against this person if they don't do what they're supposed to do. This technology can really help with that. So, I say here again, it's the first time in history you can have all these three properties in a transaction, peer-to-peer, no central authority, exclusively digital. You don't need to meet in meet space. You don't need to know who each other really are. And it's self-enforcing and therefore trustless. So how does this pertain potentially to the healthcare space and particularly mental health? So one application is that I think could be really powerful, and I tried to make this as realistic as possible where the technology currently is, rather than introducing lots of speculative stuff that may or may not happen with the technology in the future. So think of domestic abuse victims, right? These are people who they may be desperately in need of treatment, but they may wish to remain anonymous for all kinds of reasons, including that they may not want their partner to go to jail, right? And so they may say, well, geez, if I go to get help, the therapist will be under a legal obligation because I'm in danger to maybe disclose it to some authority, and I don't want that, so I'm just not going to get the help, right? So could blockchain enable a way for patients to get the help they need while still remaining anonymous and also allowing the therapist to comply with the therapist's legal duties? And I think it could. There are certainly questions, but this is sort of how it would work. So, therapist Bob specializes in treating this type of patient, and he says, well, I know there are a lot of people out there who need my help. I'm going to post on my website, I'm going to post some instructions, and I'm going to post an Ethereum blockchain address. And me as Bob, I still want to get paid, but how can I get comfortable without going through insurance companies, without knowing who the person is, etc.? Well, I can use a smart contract escrow, right? So the person who wants help, they can send some cryptocurrency to a smart contract I've set up. That contract will hold the crypto, and I don't have to otherwise know who that person is. I don't have to go through insurance to submit a claim, but I still could get paid at the end of the day. That would be the idea. So, Bob's website describes all this. It perhaps mentions his credentials, and it provides the instructions. So, and what does the patient do? The patient, sends money to the contract, right? And the patient, following the instructions, may set up a pseudonymous email address, may send an email to Bob saying, here are the issues that I'm having. Bob may send follow-up questions via email. One question is, how does Bob even know that the person who sent the email is the one who sent the cryptocurrency, right? Cryptography and blockchain technology also solve that, because without getting too technical about it, all of blockchain is built, frankly, most of the internet is built on public key cryptography. And so Bob can know without having my secret key that I must have my secret key, that the secret key I have is both the source of the funds he got and the source of the emails he got. And you can do that using cryptography. So he can verify within a reasonable degree of certainty, not absolute certainty, that the person who sent the funds is also the person emailing with him. So he has some basic sense of verification. What are the advantages of this, right? Patient anonymity, right? That's sort of the big one. The patient is not getting known through this. Bob is getting known, and maybe Bob would want to be anonymous as well. That's a tougher question, right? Because people want to know that they're dealing with a credentialed therapist. So probably he shouldn't be anonymous, but maybe it's good that the patient can. Patient authentication, right? Despite the anonymity, Bob can still verify that the patient is the payer and that he's treating the right person. Therapist authentication. Now here, this would require building additional infrastructure, but what you can do with blockchain is what's called tokenizing credentials. So when the idea would be that when Bob got his degree and his license, that some central authority would have issued him a cryptographic token that again corresponds to his private key. And so he could send that token to people and without, or evidence that he owns the token to people, and without them having to go through, check with a state licensure system and potentially, again, compromise their anonymity, they can know, as long as they trust cryptographic math, that Bob is the real deal, right? So patient can authenticate therapist. The prepayment arrangement that's enabled by the smart contract may be very appetizing to both parties, right? Bob eliminates his credit counterparty risk without needing to KYC the person, without needing to identify them, do due diligence on them, without needing to go through an insurance company. For the patient, they're probably getting charged a cheaper price by virtue of eliminating some of that bureaucracy. In addition to that, with some additional infrastructure being built again, this actually could feed into a peer review system where Bob submits a blinded version of his work to a jury of his peers. The peers review the work, sign off that it's competent, so to speak, based on the blinded facts, and if and only if a sufficient number of people who have voted, then the funds get released to Bob through the smart contract. So that's good for the patient as well, because then the patient can know, hey, Bob's not going to get paid unless he did a good job, even though I'm paying him in advance. I can get the money back if it's poor work. And there are systems, in other contexts. For example, there's a blockchain dApp called firstblood.io, and they have built something very, very similar to that for esports tournaments, gaming tournaments, where cheating is very rampant, but actually there's a lot of money in esports. And so it becomes important to filter out this cheating, and the only way you can do that is by having judges who get some crypto-economic rewards for judging correctly and adjudicating disputes. So we already kind of have that, and that could easily be applied to therapy as well. So that's that's sort of the application. There's a lot to think about in all this, including both logistically and legally, right? Just talking about sort of smart contracts in general. Forget about this particular context, but what happens if a company has a bunch of money in a smart contract that, remember, is unstoppable, and the company goes bankrupt, and the smart contract is programmed to send that money to some third party that's not the highest up in the creditor chain, right? And that's not who the money's supposed to go to, right? It's supposed to go to like the debt holders at that point. But literally the contract could be set up so that it is unstoppable by anyone as long as the network continues to exist. So it's a very unique problem in contract law, and it's, there's going to be a lot to think through in all applications of blockchain, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys a flavor of it.